All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming down tonight. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, so a note to our internet audience watching at home. If you're interested in tonight's book, we could ship it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. Just call the number on your screen. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to present Mr. James Anderson and his new book, The Never Open Desert Diner. Mr. Anderson was born in Seattle, grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and is a graduate of Reed College, where he received his BA in American Studies. He then attended Pine Manor College in Boston, where he received his MFA in creative writing. From 1975 to 1991, Mr. Anderson was the publisher and editor-in-chief of Brighton Bush Books, publishers of general interest nonfiction, fiction, and creative nonfiction. His short fiction, poetry, essays, and reviews have appeared in many magazines. The Never Open Desert Diner is his first novel. It is a unique blend of literary mystery and noir fiction that evokes a strong sense of place, but I will let him tell you about it. Please give a very warm welcome to Mr. James Anderson.
Thank you, Victor. It's great to be here at Books and Books. Before I read a short section of the Never Open Desert Diner, I want to thank Mitch and Steve and Victor and the rest of the staff for inviting me to Books and Books. I think of books as churches. And as churches go, this one is a cathedral. I almost missed my own appearance here tonight because I was reading an amazing account of the building of the Flagler Railroad along the Florida Keys. Last Train to Paradise by a fine writer and a fine man, Les Standiford. Damn, that man can write. It's history that reads like a literate thriller. Thanks, Les, for giving me the vacation from the anxiety most of us writers feel when we have to show up and stand and deliver. As some of you know, and as Victor just pointed out, I used to be a book publisher and editor. Mark Twain once said only two things were required to be a publisher: arrogance and ignorance. Since I was 22 at the time, I had both in brimming supply. Being on this side of the book, so to speak, is a very different world. Thank you all. I've been doing interviews lately, and a recurring question is, why now? The best short answer is, I'm turning 63 next week. Around this time in life, if there's something you've always really wanted to do, you best get to it. So many people say they want to write or are writing novels. That, and they want to own a restaurant. So sometimes I have this image of heaven filled with people hunched over computers or typewriters in newly opened restaurants. Here's the problem with finishing your book in heaven. Ask any writer on this side of the grass, and they will probably be quick to tell you, point blank, there will not be any book publishers in heaven. So in that sense, to paraphrase my favorite literary critic, Richard Howard, all writing is a salvationist exercise. In my case, as a recovering book publisher, I need more salvation than most. But The Never Open Diner is not my first novel. It is simply my first published novel. I wrote 7 others, finishing the first when I was 16. I didn't seriously try to publish any of them because it seemed more important to devote myself to the work of being a publisher, which I left 25 years ago. Yet I was always writing. Nothing is more thrilling or rewarding to me than the blank page. I am proud of the work I did as a publisher and editor, and in a way my first published novel might never have been written if not for one of the last books I published, the award-winning The Telling Distance, Conversations with the American Desert by Bruce Berger. My novel is dedicated in part to Bruce, who over the years has become a good friend, better than anyone has a right or hope to have. I want to begin tonight by sharing one of my favorite conversations from that book. It's called How to Look at a Desert Sunset. It is very brief, and I think it'll set the mood for my own work. Excuse me. Carol, nice to see you. Bruce Berger, from The Telling Distance, How to Look at a Desert Sunset. Too much has been made of desert sunsets, particularly in the captions of oversaturated magazine photos. Because desert skies tend to be clear, they can't match the Midwest for cloud effects or smog and flame cities for their sheer longevity. But they are inferior only to those novices who look naively in the direction of the setting sun. For the real desert sunset occurs in the last rays deflected through clear skies to the east as they fall on the long, minutely eroded mountain ranges and bathe our eyes with light of decreasing wavelengths and cooling colors, vermilion to salmon to plum, transporting the eastern horizon to islands of pure yearning. The desert rat, so in love with distance that he commonly carries binoculars to bring it up close, instinctively focuses the dreamlight mountains to heighten the effect. Here an odd reversal takes place, for what is plumb to the naked eye, confined and enlarged, turns drab as cement, while the heaped knobs and extravagant spires turn out to be exfoliated granite. The observer knows how this stone weathers into rounded piles, how it crumbles underfoot, how it is colonized by black lichen. Fascinating as geology, it has been mastered by experience. It has been turned to stone. That is the revelation of desert sunsets, that the distance is so unmoored, so delicious, that you want to be there, to become that distance. And the closer you come, quickly through binoculars, because it darkens even as you watch, the faster it burns into the ash of reality. Then you find out that you are where you want to be, precisely where you began, stripped to your bare eyes, watching as best you can, yearning. Bruce Berger, Telling Distance. So what I've done is I have found a stash of first editions of that book left over from being a publisher, and I'm going to leave them here with the store. And I've got two of them. They're not just first editions. They're the special numbered and signed, bound in Chinese silk, slip-cased and numbered and signed by Mr. Berger and Navajo artist Johnson Charlie. The edition is a gorgeous book craft, and it's very rare. That edition was limited to just 150 copies. So, Books and Books, here you go. Over the past few months, I've been asked how this novel came to be. My protagonist is an approaching 40, unmarried truck driver who makes deliveries along a beautiful but isolated 100-mile stretch of Utah desert. As the author, Roland Marullo, and various reviewers have remarked, the novel is a love story, a mystery, and a meditation on place. Yes, but where did it come from? From very unexpected and personal literary headwaters. I began writing it when I had been working on another novel for 5 years, which suddenly disappeared when the computer it was on was stolen. I was living in the Four Corners region of the American Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, and I was moving around quite a lot. It was a tough time, and no one was ever more lost in the desert than I was at that time. I wanted to escape, most of all from myself, or perhaps rather to myself, which has been the aim of desert exiles for thousands of years. My life was peripatetic, and who leads a more peripatetic existence than a truck driver? Who has more time to think, ponder, muse? Who is more intimately involved in the constantly changing weather and landscape and light? And in my protagonist's case, the people who have chosen to exile themselves in the desert. The movement of the novel follows Ben Jones's delivery route until circumstances dictate that his stops follow the characters, action, and plot of the story, and literary influences. So many. Thomas Merton, Wisdom of the Desert Fathers, and the seminal Hispanic masterpiece of magic realism, Pedro Paramo by Juan Rufalo. Add to that John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee series, James Crumley's Milo Madragovich, the poetry of Richard Hugo and Jim Welch, and the novels of James Lee Burke and others, along with the desert literature of Barry Lopez, Gretel Ehrlich, and Terry Tempest Williams, and of course, Bruce Berger. Is it any wonder that I cooked up such a strange stew? Not exactly noir, not exactly romance, not exactly genre mystery, not exactly literary fiction, not exactly a journey of spiritual discovery. It's not really exactly anything at all, except, I hope, a wonderful story that magically clings to the emotional skin of a reader. And did I manage to effect my escape? Very much so. And my greatest hope is that readers can follow me into that deceptive emptiness, that unique, nomadic desert existence where everything that truly matters rises to coexist with the fullness of nothing, just as it has for desert dwellers for thousands of years. And all of it wrapped up in a simple story of a lonely truck driver who discovers a woman playing a cello with no strings in the high desert of Utah. So I'm just going to read a brief part here, and I kind of want to bring you up to speed a little bit. The romantic interest is a woman named Claire, and Ben, the truck driver, meets her very briefly under embarrassing circumstances earlier in the day. And he's driving back to where he's discovered this abandoned housing development. All it has is a model home, and it's on the other side of a small hill, and he decides, well, let me just have Ben tell you. No other vehicles appeared in either direction for almost an hour. I searched the road ahead for the turnout to Desert Home, unable to decide if I was going to stop. It wasn't until I'd parked and set the brake and listened to the engine relax that I began to wonder why I had stopped, where I was so clearly unwelcome, the famous scene of the crime. My wondering was short-lived. I knew from experience that if you're about to do something you probably shouldn't do, the best advice you can give yourself is not to think about it too long. It ruins the surprise when the worst happens. The wind picked up in ferocious gusts that roared in my ears and partially obscured the view of the model home. I hiked down the slope. Blowing sand burrowed inside my clothes and forced me to squint. Well away from the porch, I threw my hello toward the house. The chair was gone. I shouted several more times, gradually moving closer each time. With each step, the wind scooped up my voice with the sand and sent them both to parts unknown. I knocked on the door. The wind took that too. The front windows were now covered with blankets from the inside. Newspaper had been taped across the picture window on the north side. Two of the sheets didn't completely overlap and allowed just the sliver of a view. I pushed my cap back on my forehead and cupped my hands to shield my eyes from the blowing sand. The woman sat on the green chair that had been on the porch. She was alone. The chair was the only piece of furniture in the empty room. Her bare left shoulder angled toward my window. A skylight directly overhead encircled her with a narrow stream of honeyed light. The rest of her body drifted in shadow. My eyes adjusted. Her raised left elbow revealed the soft curve of a breast. She appeared to be vaguely Asian, though her skin looked too white. Her fingers moved rhythmically along the slender neck of a musical instrument. The wind died. Silence took its place. I held my breath. What was about to happen was rare, though I had experienced it a few times in my years on Highway 117. The setting sun burned into a layer of advancing high red clouds that swirled with sand. Propelled by the wind, the clouds picked up speed and rushed across the flatlands where they broke against the mesa cliffs and splintered like a giant wave. The backwash of wind roared toward me across the miles of desert shore, driving sand ahead of it. My hands glowed from the intense, approaching light. I was caught in a blinding red flash. The air around me crackled with electricity. I fought the impulse to close my eyes. The skylight above the woman's head filled the room with a pulsing pink glow, like the inside of a beating heart. In the unnatural light, the fingertips of her left hand flew over the absent strings. Her right hand grasped nothing as it sawed the air. The soundless instrument rocked side to side with music only she could hear, and I could only imagine. The light in the room transformed into deepening shades of the spectrum. I tried to recall the name of the instrument the woman played. Its name was lost in the curve of her bare shoulder and half oval of breast, seamless yet distinct against the instrument. The woman and the instrument were a cameo in the empty room. She stopped playing. I felt shame. I had no right to be there. It was wrong. Too late, I realized the light had slipped behind me. Thank you. Well, Miss Carol, do you have any questions?
You talked about the desolation of the desert.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think you're pretty familiar, and by the way, welcome to Florida.
Thank
I
you.
think you're pretty familiar with Alligator Alley. So would
Uh-huh.
that be your sequel? That you would do something across a truck driver across alley is pretty desolate, okay?
Well, I think I'm going to stay away from Florida, except to visit. But you know, one of the influences that I mentioned was Travis McGee, written by John D. MacDonald,
Right.
and John D. passed away in the mid '80s. But I was recently talking to Dennis Lehane, and there are so many of us that cut our mystery teeth on John D. MacDonald, especially Travis McGee. And Travis McGee, in those mysteries, he made Florida, you know, the environment, the light, the reptiles. He made all of that live, and that really became as much a character, Florida, Southern Florida, in his books as the rest of the people in that series. So that had a lot of influence on me because I wanted to write something that had a real strong sense of place. And John D. loved Florida, and I love the desert. So that's the way that worked out.
So you've sort of found your place in the desert then, as far as that is a character in your novel.
It is, because the weather and the geology, that begins to dictate, to a certain degree, what happens with the characters too.
Right.
And John D. MacDonald's books, the Travis McGee, he moves around a bit later in the novels, but I don't know anybody who read those books that didn't feel like they had a real sense, not necessarily of the tourist Florida, but the sense of history, and the people making making a go of it here. And same thing in the desert. You know, I've got my strange characters too. I mean, I've got a guy that drives that pulls a life-size cross along a desert highway. I've got two crazy brothers who live in box cars that are mounted on cinder blocks.
They're hysterical.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, I was recently doing an interview, and it struck me how many people really. The heroine of the novel is a 17-year-old punk, homeless, pregnant teenager. She's living in her car. She's working nights at Walmart. She ends up saving the day. She saves Ben. She saves everything. She's resourceful and tough. And so in an odd way, you know how detectives always have Velma, they have their Girl Friday or whatever. Well, Ben, the truck driver, has a 17-year-old pregnant homeless punk teenage girl. So, you know, I had fun, and you know, I hope people have just a little bit of the fun that I had writing it. Yeah, and reading it, yeah.
You mentioned Dennis Lehane.
Yes.
And of course, we both share a real admiration
Oh,
for
yeah.
him through the Solstice.
Yeah, where we went to
MFA,
graduate program, yeah.
right, in creative writing program, and I just wonder if that experience was helpful to you as well when you were writing your novel.
It was. You know, the MFA program at Solstice is very diverse. And so you have all kinds of people of all ages and diversity in all of its forms there. And Dennis, who's a writer in residence, I don't know if Dennis is still the writer in residence there, but Dennis, he sort of sets the tone, at least for fiction, that there's no such thing as genre fiction, or you know, there's only good writing, and he has a real blue-collar ethic about it, which is, you say you want to do it, do it. And which is why Mystic River, for instance, even though it was considered a noirish mystery, I believe the New York Times, when they reviewed it, they gave it a rave review, said it meets all the requirements of literary fiction. And so I think there's only one kind of writing, the very best kind of writing you can do. And genres and so on, that's for shelving, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
You also, on your dedication page, I thought you did something I'd never seen before, and that was that you really gave tribute to characters in books that you had read, and then you gave tribute to Sterling Watson,
Yeah.
who we know and love, who is a prolific author, and Dennis.
Oh, you know, I
was
was tremendously blessed to have
Yes.
Sterling Watson, who's up in Tampa, and at Eckerd College, and who was also Dennis Lehane's mentor, and William Hastings and Joe Gannon and so, yeah, and Mike Miner, so many of us. So I very, very fortunate to have been at Pine Manor, particularly at that time. Just do the work. You just do the work. So,
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. Victor, anything?
Yeah, James, you kind of preempted my question in your presentation when you were talking about the writers who influenced or who sort of inspired this novel.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that would leave me wondering that, you know, as a former publisher, your reading must be very wide and very extensive. But apart from those authors who influenced this book, what would you say are the authors who are your bread and butter, let's say, the people who you really enjoy the most? A tough question, I know.
Well, yeah, because I know we don't have that much time. But yeah, let me say that I came to writing very early, but orally. I'm hearing stories and so on. My friend Luis Urrea the writer is often asked about why he became a writer or how he became a writer, and I always loved his answer. He says, well, because I came from a family of unreliable narrators. Liars. And if you want to lie, I think you probably have two choices. You can go into politics or you can become a writer. Politics probably pays better. In fact, I know it does. But as far as the writers, very eclectic mix, because I read everything now. I read neuroscience. I read physics. I read memoirs. I just finished reading Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, which is it's nonfiction, and it's essentially an incredible argument against the death penalty, and yet it reads. The pages just fly by. It's an incredible piece of writing, but it's social commentary, let's say. And I just don't see any way that people can read all the classics because there are so many. I
Life
mentioned
is too short for everything that one feels that one should read. Yeah.
well, I kept hoping, like a lot of people, when I was in college and I had to read so much, that during those breaks I would get to read things I really wanted to read. Well, that list is probably up to 5,000 or 6,000 books now, at least. So I'm reading all the time. I don't know how anybody can say that they write, that they're going to write unless they're reading a lot. You have to feed yourself. I've always been impressed. Ray Bradbury is one of my favorite writers. He passed away last year or the year before. Told a story about how when he was writing Fahrenheit 451, he wrote it, and suddenly he said to himself, how do I know that paper burns at 451? And so he began thinking about it, and when he was very young, he had, I think it was rheumatic fever or something, and he had to be in bed for a couple of years, and his mother started bringing him books from the library. And then pretty soon she began bringing whole sections of the little library, and he discovered, and so he said, I retained everything that I read. And he says the human brain is a marvelous thing. He said it retains everything, but it won't always tell you where it came from. So, any more questions?
The title is really interesting to me, and I just wondered if you could speak to how you chose that title.
I had another title for a long time. My publisher didn't like it, and so on. And like most writers, what did my publisher know? And so I actually had come up with another title that was that came right out of the book, The Never Open Desert Diner, because at the center of this story is a diner that is kept in perfect condition by this embittered old man, and yet it's always closed. And there used to be billboards that gave the name of the diner originally was the well-known Desert Diner, but somebody spray painted it to say the Never Open Desert Diner because people kept showing up there and it was closed. So I sent that out to a bunch of friends and asked everybody to vote, I think the Never Open Desert Diner won by one vote. It was pretty close, but the rest of the people who were involved in making this novel happen liked it, and so it's so rare we have a chance to make more than 50% of the people in our lives happy.
True.
So
It's a great title. It's very tongue-in-cheek,
So, but I just want to say it's wonderful to be at Books and Books and in Coral Gables. The response to my weird little desert novel it's been amazing. I've been stunned. But I didn't think of it as strange. Marilyn Stasio in the New York Times Book Review called it a wondrously strange book. And you know what I thought? at that time, instead of thinking, oh, that's great, of course it was. This is a New York Times book review. But I thought to myself, I didn't think it was strange. Then I started thinking, does she mean I'm strange because I wrote it? But maybe it is a little bit strange, but strange things happen in the desert.
Yes, they do.
So, yep.
Thank you, James.
Thank you very much.
All right, so if there are no more questions, note to our internet audience, there's still time to call the number on your screen, and we'll send the book to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. For those of you here in the house, we have the book for sale at the counter in the front room over there, and James is going to be signing here at the table to the left of the podium. Thank you very much. All right, good. Well done, James.